Hello. The concept of learning styles relies upon the notion that people learn in a variety of ways and that people will mobilise one or more styles in different circumstances. Now, for years, learning styles have been a widely used tool in the recognition of the diversity of learners, not only here in HE but also other sectors. The intuitive appeal of designing teaching around them is reflected in the plethora of learning models available and the commercialisation of some of them. Right, this video centres on a critical review carried out by Cofield and colleagues in 2004, which is a comprehensive study of learning styles and their use. Now, they identified 71 original models of learning styles which were not derivatives of other models. Now, 13 of these were explored in detail as they were the most influential at the time. They also grouped the underlying and different beliefs about models of learnings into 5 families. The categorization of the various models into families are mapped onto a continuum, and you'll notice the fixed self on the left-hand side and the flexible environment on the opposite. Now, this is because one important distinction between the models is the extent to which the originators see individual traits and abilities as being somehow derived from the individual's nature and thus fixed, or alternatively, as repertoires picked up from experience and the person's environment. Now, in this video, I'm going to focus on the characteristics of the families with models that you may have come across. Now, the first of these are in the constitutionally based family. Now, these are underpinned by the belief that learners are born with a particular learning style which includes the senses. Now, one of the questionnaires that you completed would have allocated you to a sensory preference. Incidentally, the instrument you use is a derivative and not an original survey, but it will give you an idea of the type of models which focus on the senses, which are, of course, visual, auditory, kinesthetic and tactile. Now, I'm jumping now towards the middle of the continuum, to models which are categorized as fairly stable personality types. These models raise individuals' awareness of their selves. An example is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which you may have heard of. Now, this model draws on the work of Jung in that seemingly random variation in behaviour is actually quite orderly and consistent, and due, in fact, to basic differences in the way individuals prefer to use their perception and judgment. Now, anyone tested with the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator is identified as being one of 16 distinctive personality types. The next family of models are categorized as flexible learning preferences. In this category is the instrument of Honey and Mumford. Now, this is very popular and one of the most commercialized learning style instruments. Now, results of the survey or the instrument would indicate somebody's learning style in terms of 4 learning types: activists, theorists, pragmatists and reflectors. Now, although the questionnaire you will have used prior to this video is not the actual Honey and Mumford survey, it would give you an idea of the taste of, or certainly give you an idea of the model itself. Now, in this next slide, you may recognise Kolb's experiential cycle from the earlier video. The styles identified by Honey and Mumford intentionally map to the various stages of the cycle. So, there we go: activist, reflector, theorist and pragmatist. Now, you will also note in the previous slide that Kolb was featured in the Flexible Stable Learning Preferences for his Learning Style Inventory. Now, however, versions of the LSI, as it's been called, with issues with reliability and validity, and the Honey and Mumford model was thought to be an improvement on Kolb's instrument. However, certainly Cofield and his colleagues found no evidence of pedagogical impact. Now, this is perhaps not surprising, because if you buy into the idea of the Kolb cycle, it would follow that you would need to overcome any learning preferences. For example, if your learning style is that of an activist, which is often thought of as a risk taker who often rushes into action without sufficient preparation, You would need to curb this tendency to work through the other, perhaps more thoughtful and considered stages of reflection and reviewing and making sense of your experiences, which of course map to the styles of the reflector and theorist. So, implications for practice. Now, I'm not losing the plot. I've deliberately used a question mark to consider if we can use learning styles in our practice. At this point, think about your experience of undertaking the questionnaires. Now, how much would you trust the results? Would you say the results are reliable? The chances are that there was at least one question, and possibly a lot more, that you were not sure how to answer. Now, this raises questions of validity. Now, over the years, I've used various instruments with staff, and there is always issues around validity. In addition, some members of staff have retried instruments and obtained different results, which makes the instrument's reliability questionable. Now, add on top of this the hot debate surrounding learning styles and Cofield's findings highlighting the reliability and validity issues associated with many of the key instruments, you might well be wondering why you've been listening to this video. Now, my response is this. Now, firstly, we should definitely not be testing students to ascertain learning styles in order to teach them in a particular way. Labelling students is counterproductive and particularly risky if the instrument you use is found to be unreliable. However, discussing and thinking about learning styles is a useful way of helping us to develop our practice so that it is varied and inclusive. For example, there is a lot of information available about how to accommodate the learning styles of Honey and Mumford. So why don't you use this information to help you plan activities to support students through the various stages of Kolb's cycle? Now, similarly, the constitutionally based family does make us think about using all the senses in our teaching. Ask yourself, are you relying too much on talking in your sessions without providing alternative forms of input to convey ideas and concepts? For example, using written text, diagrams, pictures. Also, are you providing opportunities for students with concrete experiences? Now, when we discuss the values of the UK PSF, the United Kingdom Professional Standards Framework, we talked about presenting material in a variety of ways to accommodate the diverse needs of students, including those with dyslexia or international students for whom English is not their first language, or indeed students who may have difficulty understanding your accent or dialect. The point is, if you look at your practice holistically and incorporate the sensory modalities in your presentations, you are supporting not only specific groups of students, but developing good habits and practice for all your students. Now, in this unit, you'll also find 2 short YouTube clips arguing for and against learning styles. And finally, for the last family, the work I'm highlighting here is the work of Noel Entwistle and the notions of deep, surface and strategic learning. Now, these notions move away from the idea of learning styles to student approaches to learning. Now, this conceptual tool sits quite neatly alongside constructivist ideas. So the starting point is that a student's approach to the task of learning helps set the level of engagement with the subject and the quality of learning achieved. Now, approaches to learning are context dependent. They describe ways students relate to particular learning and teaching episodes, so they are not fixed or innate characteristics. So let's look in detail at Entwistle's notions of deep, surface and strategic learning. So with a deep approach to learning, these are some of the defining features. Now, do stop the video to read them in more detail. But the student's intention here is to understand ideas for him or herself. So they might also be actively interested in the course content. Students adopting this approach are seeking meaning. And according to Prosser and Trigwell, writing in 1999, without exception, research studies showed that deep approaches to learning were more likely to be associated with higher quality learning outcomes. So that's a deep approach to learning. On the other hand, a surface approach to learning is learning to reproduce content. Again, these are some of the defining features of this approach. Now, students' intention here is to cope with course requirements. And the third approach is the strategic approach to learning. Now, Entwistle argues that students are taking a strategic approach intend to achieve the highest possible grades. And you can see this, and some of you may recognise students who always want to know if this is going to be in the assessment. So that's the strategic approach. Now, Cofer and his colleagues found that there seemed to be an implicit value judgment in Entwistle's work, which is perhaps shared by most academics, in that a deeper approach to learning is preferable to a strategic approach. Now, certainly this has been my feeling when I've been discussing this with participants on the course over the years, but as Cofield argues, it may be more realistic to foster good strategic approaches at the outset and then to build deeper approaches to learning. Now, we would all love our students to be deeply engaged in learning and teaching in our discipline, but as Entwistle argues, we should be able to explain to students how to become more effective learners, to think out carefully what they are trying to achieve from their studying, and to understand the implications of adopting deep and surface approaches to learning. Now, the video in this unit on academic literacies will give you some food for further thought. So thank you for listening.